All right. So why don't we begin? I mean, this is going to be an interesting thing because we don't have any slides or anything. This is all about just discussing the viewpoints and building on the body of work. And really what we've done over the last sort of 3 months is we've put 3 in-person events together, one in London, the second in Boston, the third in Lisbon. And we've brought together all these different viewpoints about what is going to be the future of work and where we will be in 2030. So this is a chance to bring together all of those viewpoints in one place and just see where it goes from here. We've got people from all over the place, from India, from Exeter, from London, from Boston, from, I don't know what places on here, let me just check. People that aren't naturally part of the Canopy community, but are logging in because they're interested in the webinar. And thank you to everybody for being here. So no pressure, Angelique, no pressure, Jill, no pressure, Annie. Let's kick this ball rolling. I should also say we've put a poll into the Zoom here. We're going to release 2 other polls during the course of the webinar. So have a look at that poll. And there's a Q&A function, hopefully that everybody can see. If you've got questions, we'll be monitoring that. So you can add those in at any point. And you can also upvote those questions as an attendee on the...
Is somebody moderating those questions?
Yeah, Annie and I are looking at those as we go through, okay?
Okay.
All right, so the first poll's already live, and that is... can you see it? Hopefully I can see it. So let's begin then. Angelique, 2030. What is the future of work in your mind? What will we all be doing? Where will we be doing it? What will it look like?
Yeah, as a sociologist, looking at trends and things that are happening in society, my main focus is on the human perspective. So I see a lot of people having different views about what the place of work in their life should be and in society. So things are aiming in towards having more impacts, being more purpose-driven, people connecting through values, but very globally, and people being way more location independent and therefore also choosing their own locations to work from. And a lot of changes in employee-employer relationships, moving towards the gig economy. So it will all be very much a different perspective compared to where you came from, the 9-to-5, 40-hour work week and lifetime employment.
Okay, fantastic. And can you tell everybody who's on the webinar a little bit about who you are and your background at Hello Monday Club?
Yeah, so I made this transition myself. I have a background in human resources in big multinationals. When I actually came to the most executive level, I found that I didn't have enough influence, and I got what I mostly noticed is that how people in those corporate structures cannot live up to their full potential, and therefore companies cannot use the full potential of employees as well. So that made me start to explore different grounds and horizons. I went to university and did organizational sociology and studied a lot of new and different organizational concepts. After that, I kept on studying the future of work, startup cultures, innovative companies, and that all evolved into me becoming an expert in that field. And I launched Hello Monday Club in 2018. And that was a result of that journey. And now I have a consultancy business helping tech companies and forward-thinking companies to transition to that future of work. I work location independent myself for a big deal. So a big amount of my time I'm moving between Amsterdam, Lisbon, and Brazil. My clients are startups and also bigger established companies. We work with new organizational concepts. My clients are from basically globally, so they're from different countries, and they usually have a remote component as well. So I really made a transition from being in a corporate career to a very modern day consultancy business in terms of my own lifestyle, the way I run my company, the clients, and the concepts I work with.
Wow, okay, thank you very much. That's brilliant. Brilliant. Jill, could we ask the same for you? Can you give us a quick introduction and what you think the world will look like in 2030?
Sure. My background, I came out of Procter & Gamble, working in marketing, product management, and moved ultimately into turnaround and restructuring work and became a CEO of a small publicly held company here in the United States, which I turned around out of bankruptcy and sold to a private equity group. So that's pretty much what I do, is turnaround and restructuring work. But I got very interested in 2011 out some research out of Harvard that talked about why women generally did not become CEOs a second time. It's called the Glass Cliff research. And from there, I went into a deep dive on gender medicine, on the scientific differences between men and women. And I spent a lot of time researching, studying that, and teaching organizations and facilitating sessions on the biological differences between men and women and how that manifests itself in the workplace. So I find it really interesting work. I started my own company. I'm the CEO of a company called Gendiversity. And when we look at the future of work, we look at it really two ways, I guess. One is we do not see the human element changing at all. We're going to have men and women in the workforce for a long time to come. We're going to need humans to do the work. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, while we saw people building all kinds of equipment and machinery, people's jobs might have changed. They may have learned, instead of being a seamstress, they didn't lose their jobs. They just learned how to run the sewing machine and become more efficient as they did that. They didn't lose their jobs as farmers. They just got more efficient with the tractors. So when we look at the future of work, we do not really see the human element changing dramatically. Robots and AI is not going to change the requirement to have human beings and social interaction going on in the workplace. So we continue to focus on who are the two types of human beings that work in the workplace together, and they are biologically either male or female. And we do focus differently, we do function differently. Every body system is completely different. So when we look at it, at the future of work, we look at ways how women can benefit the workplace better and how men can benefit the workplace better, because after all, we're there for profitability. That's what it's about. How can we make more money, and how can we be more profitable?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. And I think your keynote sparked a lot of different thoughts for people in Boston. It was
good.
The Nothing State, I think it was called, right? Which,
the Nothing Box. That's right.
Talk about that in a second. So Annie, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about what you see the future of?
Sure. I'm Ani Gupta. I'm in Lisbon currently. I'm from a digital tech background, way back from the 90s, .com time. And I've had my own companies, I've consulted, I've been remote for almost 10 years, probably a little more. And I've worked and set up teams that are distributed, that are talking about, well, we started working remotely, for example, the first time with a company. This is pre-Slack, pre-collaborative tools even. So I've been very interested in how people work together in collaborative environments, in different situations, and kind of at the cutting edge of things. The last few years, I was a digital nomad as well. So I lived and worked from different countries, different time zones, went through the challenges of running teams, understanding productivity methodologies and everything. And for me, it's the future of work is an evolving thing. I've been reading and researching a lot about it in the last few months specifically. And well, like Jill said, it's not going to be that human beings are going to be out of the equation for sure. That's not what the future of work is. But it is true that the type of jobs we have today and that have been around traditionally will definitely be impacted, at least on the lower end of the spectrum, where there's less creative, cognitive work involved. And one of the things that nobody really has been able to understand is what is the impact of that. For example, if you have a large, I think there was a really good podcast I was listening to talking about truck drivers. In an era, let's say by 2030, one of the things from the trends that I'm looking at and studying, it's obvious that battery-powered cars and trucks and self-driving vehicles are going to be quite prevalent. And what happens to these truck drivers who lose their jobs? Can we upskill them, or can people be upskilled at all? I think the biggest question, even in the States, from town halls right now, and some of the town halls that I've listened to, is people are asking, well, you're talking about upskilling people or moving away from the traditional jobs, but you're not providing us resources. So where are the governments in this? Where are the organizations that's supposed to take charge of this? Corporates are moving towards different types of methodologies and processes and working, but are they really doing enough? 2030 is what, 11 years away. Do we have the mechanisms to deal with the pace of change, technological change that is happening right now? We talk about AI, which is essentially deep machine learning. That is going to change a lot of different jobs very, very rapidly. Things are already happening. Like, for example, the stock market. Brokers don't do the same job that they used to. Maybe in banking, things are going to change dramatically as well. So the question remains, and that's a very interesting question to understand and to talk about and read about, is what happens to all these people that are displaced from their jobs? There are other questions around digital inequality, which is happening. I mean, do people have access to the right kind of technology and internet and broadband to be able to participate in this new digital workforce? These are things that are, I think, these are questions that are unanswered, and this is a very interesting time to figure that out. It's going to take a while. Would it be dystopian or utopian? We don't know. I personally have a feeling that the gig economy that we are seeing today is not really overall very good for the general population in terms of the kind of displacement it offers people, and the reduction in security for earning a life, earning enough to lead a decent life. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't believe corporations have the kind of consciousness needed to offer really good alternatives. But these are the questions I think we can discuss in today's webinar and in the future.
So Annie, I love the fact that you brought in already the kind of digital disenfranchisement stuff, and I think, Jill, we had quite a lot of discussion around that in Boston. Have you got any views you want to share on that, and I'll add in my perspective?
I'm sorry, Stewart, I didn't really understand your question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so the point Andy was making around, if you're a truck driver and you basically lose your job or lose access to that market because it's been automated, autonomous cars, or so, and then you're being upskilled. There's a number of challenges there. So firstly, are you capable of being upskilled? Secondly, are there tools around there for you to be upskilled? And also, if you're retrained or differently skilled, where do you go? And one of the points I seem to remember from the Boston discussion was, if you're kind of bouncing at a certain level, and it will happen to all of us in different shapes and forms, but at a certain level, let's say you were a truck driver and you're being retrained, you might be retrained into a retail environment previously, but that wouldn't be the same either. The automation would have displaced that. So firstly, well, I guess in there, where are you going to go? Are you capable of making the grade? What tools are there? And also, what really will be left for you at certain levels? And that level, I think some of the discussions are about how it will eat up the different strata of jobs to the point where what we see, developers is a great example. Developers will inherit the earth is something that people thought 5 years ago, but even AI is affecting that, right? Good writing code, there's less and less need for developers at the higher end of work. So yeah, where does that take your mind? What do you think about this stuff?
Well, I think of a number of things. First of all, I think one of the conversation pieces that intrigued me the most coming out of Boston was that in 10 or 15 years, there will be jobs for industries that haven't been invented yet. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a great report out of McKinsey, I think it came out in the last 6 months, that talks about the future of work by 2030, and it certainly talks about that. I know that different industries will be impacted. So for example, I'm not sure agriculture could be impacted much more than it already has, right? I mean, there's just very few jobs left in agriculture, and a lot of those people migrated to urban centers, and somehow or another they found work in urban centers. So we talk about that. Then we can talk about in terms of what is the industry. So globally, except for India, one of the industries that is very female dominated is healthcare. Okay. Are we going to be able to AI or robotic our way to healthcare? And the answer is Probably not that much. We still need people to administer the drugs and that kind of thing. So I think it depends on the industry that we're talking about. I think some of the industries we know haven't even started up yet. They haven't been invented. I don't know where truck drivers specifically go, but I am certain that they can be used for some kind of testing, or there's going to be something out there. Humans are not going away, and we have been very resilient since the 1850s in finding new jobs as the Industrial Revolution and technology has taken over. The question is the rate. What is the rate that we are going to be losing jobs? And I think Ani touched on that, and that's very difficult to predict. The McKinsey report says in the 1850s, 0.3% of jobs were displaced. By 2065, they think it will be 1.4%. That's a projection, but it's not a big, vast difference. It comes back to the point we still need humans to do whatever the work is that is ultimately going to be created.
It's interesting you mentioned will we be able to automate some of the stuff around healthcare. A friend of mine went into hospital the other day for quite a delicate operation, and the operation was conducted by a robot which was controlled by a human being, but from the room next door.
Right.
And, I find that very intriguing as an idea.
Yeah.
He too had a little moment where tears went to his eyes at the thought that that's what was about to happen.
I'd like to add something on this subject.
Please.
When I was responsible for HR in bigger companies, I was already very much aware that there was a big, especially when I was working more productive production environments, where I could see that people were falling behind in skills and personal development to be keeping up. Where their primary way of thinking, and also this has been enforced by unions, is protecting job security and income, where I think that both government and unions and employers and employees themselves should be changing that paradigm and focusing on development for everybody. So that's like digital skills, it's interpersonal skills, because the skill set we need for the future for those people to be able to adapt is very, very different. And we still have the mindset that people should be protected from all those developments instead of being prepared for all those developments. And that's something that I've been actively promoting. And I see there's sometimes it's people themselves that fall behind, they don't grab the opportunities. But sometimes it is education. Like when I am in my place in Brazil, I know that the children that live in my neighborhood hardly know how to read and write if they're 8 or 9 years old. Well, children in Amsterdam and learn, for example, they learn Chinese and they learn how to code. So there's a big inequality starting there. And I think also unions that are protecting people from losing their jobs or jobs that get automated, there should be instead saying, okay, we know this is a development that we cannot stop. We should be making sure that this group of employees get proper education and is learning how to adapt to those changes. So we can, they can still be working productively until the end of their productive lifetime.
No, very cool, very cool. I understand very much your point about the inequality there as well. And it's interesting to see, I'm involved with a school, primary school at the moment, which is a digital academy, and to see the level of efficacy they're able to achieve in reading and writing very quickly and at their own pace in these individual learning journeys. Let's say when I was at school, we all read the same book for the number of weeks to get through the week. Just, the learning experience is completely different. And we just had our first question come through from Johanna, who you'll remember, Jill, from Boston. She says, how do we help people see that the job they start their career with is not the same job they will retire from? How do we help people move from job to job every decade or so? And I think one of the stats that we had in Boston was from Michael, and he was saying, from the leading cities perspective, I think it was, we're anticipating having, if you're under 25 right now, you're anticipating having 20 or more jobs in your lifetime that you'll be retraining and reskilling to. So who wants to take Johanna's question?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of pitch in that way. So that's the thing, right? So this entire thing about that you have this one job, and my parents' generation, they worked their entire life in the same job, which is something that even I don't understand how to do, because I've never really focused on building a career on just one particular track, right? I've had well, I followed my own path and own dream. I'm definitely an outlier, even in my generation. I know my friends that are following that traditional way of working. You get one job, then you wait for 30 years till you retire, or 35 years. We have a millennial generation now, which doesn't believe in that either. Now, here's a very interesting question. I mean, do we have enough time in the next 11, 15 years to really change that mindset? That we want to work our lives, we want to be fulfilled, and then we want to be able to retire and have something back from that. Now, except for certain Western democracies, I don't see that becoming a reality for a lot of people. I think people will not have people should not be, they don't expect to have a life of that nature, that you have one career, then you retire, and then you reap the benefits of the work you did. Most countries will not, I think, will have social security benefits left the way things are going from everything that I've read, that they're going bankrupt, these systems. And does that lead to conflict? Does it lead to dissatisfaction? Of course, I think it will. But people who are able to understand that they need to have multiple skills, or they need to move into learning more things as they progress through the career, perhaps they will benefit more. There's another thing I think somebody talked about. Dave Underwood has written in the chat window. For large percentages of people, the future of work will not involve either work as we know it or pay. In Western market economies, we appear to have to be increasing the proportions of population who are disenfranchised. And this is the same kind of question, right? Disenfranchising, people who are disenfranchised because of this incredible fast pace of change that we have currently through technology, because of technologies that are coming into play that I don't think we have seen before. Jill talked about the industrial age, and we had on McKinsey's report, but I don't know how we can even have metrics on that. The way we are changing, the way things have changed in the last 10 years, in terms of what's available, what kind of jobs there are. Social media marketing, for example, did not exist 10 years ago. Right. There's so many digital marketeers now. Half the digital nomads I've met work in some marketing thing or the other. These are jobs that came up in the last 10 years, but not everybody's been able to benefit from that. So here's my question: for the large percentages of people in, let's say, the less fortunate economies of the planet, do we have enough time? Do we have enough faith in the systems and the government and the corporations out there to be able to move those people into this new way of working, of a new mindset, even that you should not expect to be working the same career for the next 30 years? I mean, what do you guys think about that particular aspect of it? And what if we don't have it, and what's the consequences of that?
If I could just speak up for a minute, I do not believe the corporations have any vested interest. Their vested interest is in profitability. And there was just a great quote by the now CEO of Microsoft and Ginny Rometty at IBM. And they talked about they only do for their companies what's good for their companies. And if good for their companies means there's going to be an employee shortfall somewhere along the way, then they will get engaged in training disenfranchised communities. But only if it doesn't affect profitability. So I think we have to be, I hate to say legislation, but I think it's going to come down to government requiring, being responsible for the educating, and maybe either funding that through tax structures or requirements to corporations. But corporations are not going to liberate their monies just because they think it's a very nice thing to do. It's not how it works.
I think the corporations will make a movement toward to training people and investing in different school systems if they anticipate, and that's a small percentage is doing that there will be a lack of skills, people like that gap between what people learn in school and what they will actually be needing in companies, especially when it comes to tech. But it's also not primarily their responsibility. So governments are more responsible, but I think they're too slow. So I think there will be a lot of initiatives needed from projects from society, NGOs, social projects, people that take the responsibility as parents, that will add children into different kind of courses and schooling, or and stimulate behavior as well, because it's not going to be enough. And I think the schooling system is still going to be trying to give everybody the same skill set, the same educational resources, curriculum, where the time for that to develop and then implement, then it's already gone. So what they need to do is to keep children and to stimulate their natural curiosity and their talents and their strengths. And that is something that I think the traditional schooling system is just not up to. So it's a fundamental change that we need, where children, what we stop doing that, like your curiosity was stopped, and your playfulness, and being, you know, able to following your strength, because, you know, it was all about grades and having this standardized school system. So it's a fundamental change in thinking and paradigm, and how we should evaluate our schooling systems towards where we're heading to in the future. And it's a very interesting thing to see, but it's also concerning, because I don't think anybody is up for it. And you can already see, like, fear, you know, I think a lot of one of the explanations of populist parties becoming more popular is that people are afraid of everything that the future is going to bring, with all those developments that we are not ready for. So it's like a natural way to say, okay, we close our borders, we leave the EU, we just gonna, you know, go back in time and get the guilder back, and when everything was still good in the 50s. That's not possible. So it's a lot of it's an interesting and exciting, but also concerning development, where I think we should have think tanks or initiatives to help avoid the biggest problems, I suppose.
And one part of, sorry, just want to add in, but what do you guys think? What if we don't have the capacity, or we are not able to upskill or you know, move people into new jobs, or allow them to, or give them the opportunities to? Jill said corporations don't have really the vested interest unless it hits their bottom line. Governments, are they capable of moving so fast? Especially, I'm talking about larger economies or large populations. We're talking about India and China, with massive amounts of people that are coming into the workforce every year. They're the size of countries, like the entire population of some countries. And these people don't have there's just no way to move such large populations into a digital or the future of work kind of workplace. What happens in those scenarios? Are we looking at a massive worldwide conflict where people don't have jobs? Are we looking at some kind of a very dystopian 3% type of a Netflix show from Brazil kind of scenario? What do you guys think?
Well, from my perspective, just chipping on this one, I think one thing's clear, and I think if you look at the startup kernel with Brian Johnson, there's a very interesting indicator there. So if you look at how fast AI and machine learning can adapt and automate and replace, it's certainly a lot quicker than we're able to adapt as human beings and to keep up. And the startup kernel, what he's put 100 million into is kernel with a K, K-E-R-N-E-L. He's put 100 million into trying to supercharge the human consciousness and to actually augment human beings in a way that can try and keep up with AI. And he on the keynote speech, he drew a really interesting graph. It's very simple. He basically said, if you look at human beings' cognitive ability over like the last couple of millennia, and you look how we've progressed, it's pretty much a flat line. Yeah, we're not banging the rocks together anymore, but the difference between banging the rocks together and where we're at now isn't that big a leap. So if you look at the progress of AI over like the last 50, 60 years, and look where we're at now, and you look at the line, there's a point where that line goes way past us, or it gets with us, and then goes way past, much faster, an exponential growth, because the AI is by itself, placing the failure of what we see as the existence. Just be such fast. So what he was trying to do is create a technology where we can have empathy by literally stepping into what you can gain access through our brains into all of human life, that kind of stuff. It's very interesting. I'm looking at the poll here, which has got some basic stuff. People feel that the highest influence over the next 10 years will be around automation, and then by the aspiration of human society. So an interesting resonance. I'm going to close this poll and then add next one on. So have you guys seen Brian Johnson's stuff? Have you seen anything about kernel?
Stu, can you just repeat that? I think your audio is breaking up, at least for me.
Oh, you want everything about kernel, or you just want the last bit?
The pressy of the last 2 minutes, maybe.
Okay. So I guess the high level summary is machines can move faster than us. So our ability to adapt as a species is much slower than that of the machines that we're creating. And so if you look at how automation is making certain elements, let's take digital marketeers as a result, as an example. Digital marketeers, what do? They look for trends, they look for ways to engage people, and then they apply those tools so that we'll go and buy stuff or do things differently or learn things differently. And AI, a really smart AI, can do that much faster and can replace people. So then what are they going to go and do? And then that AI can adapt even faster again and look at the different trends coming much faster. And then we can adapt our skill sets and our training and our knowledge to do it. So in effect, as a species, we become redundant from quite a lot of things that we do day to day. And that kernel startup is about supercharging the human consciousness to try and keep up with that kind of progress.
Yeah, in terms of AI, I think we give a lot. There's a lot of hype around it. AI, what we call AI today, is basically artificial narrow intelligence. It just looks at patterns that we, teach it to. Or it learns how to understand. It doesn't have any kind of contextual or cognitive understanding of human behavior. Really, it has no behavior. What we're talking about, as in terms of people talk about technological singularity, is artificial general intelligence, which everybody says is decades away. Where the real displacement or the real idea of AI taking over certain things that humans are really slow at, decision making in certain industries and jobs that humans are slow at, would take effect. I'm talking about the near term, in the next 15 years. I don't think we'll have AGI. So, and like any other major revolution, like the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago, there's always going to be displacement. But I think the pace of displacement today is massive. The pace of the inequality, which is increasing, is massive. It's bigger than anything that we've seen before. The connected world plays a different role in it as well. And I believe the current rise of populism and movements like Gilets Jaunes and others in other countries is because of this fear. People have no answer to what happens for their children. Are the children ready for it? Or are their jobs secure? Can they feed their families? I think those things are serious concerns. And does it become better as we go along and understand technology in the next 10 years, or does it become worse? Those are things that I actually kind of obsess about, I guess. So I'm talking about it. I mean, those are things I'd love to hear others' perspective on.
Yeah, I don't think there's much question that there is an issue with the changing demographic, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, right? And we've certainly seen that in the United States, where I operate out of, in terms of the recession. And that's where the gig economy came from, is people had to learn, once they lost their jobs, how could they feed their families and put shelter over their heads? And there was huge disruption here in the real estate markets, disruption in the stock markets, disruption in rate of pay. So we look back at 10 years and we're finding that people are only making 1% more perhaps than they made 10 years ago. And there was a great article that just came out that said people are worse off now than they were before the recession. Can we blame all that on technology? No, but technology is certainly part of it, right? I mean, technology, whether we like it or not, continues to become immersed in our lives. We all use it, we all embrace it for the most part where we have it, and we all like it. So I really buy your point on that, Ani, is how are we going to make it a more egalitarian world for everybody so that everybody has the right to put a roof over their head and feed their families well. And that's not the direction I think that we're headed in. And then secondly, the economists are calling for a huge collapse in the global economy by 2030. And they've identified 6 industries that people need to be part of, or to be investing in now. And interestingly, it's infrastructure, it's agriculture. I forget what the other 4 are, but it's not gender relations. But I forget what the other 4 are, and it's something we really have to be sensitive to, because we've already seen the test model of the United States wreaking havoc on the global economy between 2008 2018. And if we have another one, it's going to create a mess. An even worse mess. So I think it's something that you were right to obsess about, because it's coming. That's the future of work in 2030. What's it going to look like? There may not be as many jobs as we hope there's going to be, and I'm not sure it's technology that's the problem. I think a lot of it has to do with inequities across our demographics.
I
Where do
think
you
also
want to take this,
technology
Angelique?
can also give an opportunity, because obviously there's two sides of the coin. So for example, the pressure that we have in the urban spaces at the moment that are growing, that are like putting a lot of pressure on air, on space, on life quality, on people's health. We can actually turn around that movement from the countryside to the urban centers to find jobs if we start to work like deliberately create rural locations where people can connect. For example, let's say, well, maybe Silicon Valley is actually a good example. That used to be like a rural location that started to be a tech hub, and then surrounding there you have this like traditional economy coming up, because people need to go, you know, the houses need to be built, there need to be stores, there need to be restaurants, there need to be plumbing. So instead of having, for example, in Brazil, everybody moved to Sao Paulo and having like a vast countryside that's empty, just deliberately build tech hubs and get people to be spread out. That will allow maybe also surrounding those hubs, having higher salaries, higher payment, and reaching also that are now more remote and disadvantaged communities by involving them in those tech hubs. So that's an example, combined with the general basic, universal basic income. We need to have some really major changes to be ahead of those big concerns that we can see. Because like if you say, will there be enough jobs for everybody like in 2030? Probably not. But the question also is that came up in the Lisbon discussion. Is that a bad thing? Do we need to work? Why are we working? And it's an interesting one, like the future of work, like maybe it just stops.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, London had a similar concept, right? So the Digital Athens concept, which was, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was explained as the idea that, and if you look at ancient Greece, there was a lot of very good philosophy work done during ancient Greece, and it was enabled because there were a lot of slaves, and they were doing all the things that people didn't need to do then, and they could sit around and they could think about things a bit more. The idea is in the digital world, we've got a lot of automation, robotics, other things making those slaves kind of redundant, and we can all as a species aspire to something different. That there's a certain level of work that just isn't or won't be needed in the future because we will have got it done for us. What we would do with that time, we don't know. But if we look at this kind of idea that 85% of jobs that will be around in 2030 actually haven't been invented yet, maybe you say there isn't work. It's a different kind of purpose to our existence. Mm-hmm. Is that elevating or is that degrading the human experience? I think that's a very subjective point. But will we be achieving a digital Athens, or it goes a bit more dystopian, like Andy needs to go to? I think he enjoys the movies in Blade Runner a little bit too much for this webinar. But you know, I think it's a very interesting tech. It could lean that way, right? It could lean towards the future work is no work. What would we do with that then? What would our webinar be about then?
Yeah, but I don't think, you know, I think we work not because, most of us work because we need to earn a living. Most of the human population works because they need to have money and food on the table. But I think most people that are happy with what they do are people who feel fulfilled. And I think perhaps the focus is shifting towards having a job to earn a living and support your family, to having a more fulfilled life is something that we are seeing. You know, I'm looking at startups here in Lisbon that are focused around creating a happy work culture, which is fantastic. You know, 5 years ago, there was nobody who was, launching startups and getting money to improve work culture internally in companies and focusing on happiness and things like that. But at the same time, my question again comes to, are we going to become a very divided world where the very small percentage of people that are doing this kind of work and can get these digital jobs and the new jobs, like you said, in the 85% of the new jobs that will appear in 2030, versus the vast majority of people that don't have access to this or don't have the skills to do it? What happens in that scenario? I mean, I think everybody agrees that we don't have the right kind of mechanisms or the will, government will, or the corporate interest to make sure that in 11 years we'll have some kind of answer to the question of how do we reduce inequality.
Annie, where would you see any possible solutions to that?
Well, I don't think there are. I think there are the solutions on a small scale and things like I said, right? So this thing around the universal basic income, that's very exciting, very interesting. But I don't think that a country like India can afford to do universal basic income, or China for that matter. That's half the world's population. You know, we're talking about people in Africa, for example, that are barely breaking into double digits of internet access even. So we're looking at a world where we're talking about technology playing a very important part in creating these unknown jobs of the future, which most people in the world that are coming up today will not have access to, compared to, for example, what happened after the Second World War, where there was a burst of prosperity across the world. New countries were being formed, industries were everywhere, and we had people by the 1980s that are living much better lives than their parents. Is it going to be a world in 11 years where people are living worse lives than their parents? Is a question. I don't know if there's a solution to it. I don't think we have any kind of real change that I've seen on a scale that we need to see from any country or any organization right now. So that's what makes me a little pessimistic.
I guess because it's a global challenge, right? So it can't be solved country by country. It affects us globally.
Yeah,
and AI that replaces large bits of the population's work won't settle for just in Boston or just in California or just in North America. It will keep going throughout the world. Just a quick comment from Dave. Sorry, he says, isn't the reason most people work simply to live? If there is less work, then we need to deliver new ways to live. And the only people with the money to do that will be those that are still working. Which is interesting point. Okay, so we're exploring some interesting stuff here. There's been a number of comments around education. And I guess I should share with everybody that a lot of this body of work on the future of work started when I was on the boards of, or I am on the boards of a university and a college. And we started asking ourselves the questions, what destinations should we be taking as students? We're here in 2019. It takes us 10 years to basically orchestrate new degree programs and get them up and running. So what should we be doing to actually set people on the right path? And unless you can understand the destinations they're going to, you can't really build an appropriate curriculum. You can just take these shots in the dark and hope it all works out, right? So we started looking, what will the jobs be that we need to send people towards? How will we deliver the content? What kind of content should they be doing? What's the difference between knowledge and skills, and how do you develop skills, and where do you develop skills versus how do you build bodies of knowledge for yourself? And a couple of questions here from Rodrigo. So how can modern school systems adapt to all this future change of the future workforce? Are there examples in the world online of new education systems? And Sylvia,
schools there are universities that let go of the curriculum altogether. So they have some schools where the students develop their own curriculum as they go, which is probably one of the solutions like that you encounter with that university, Stewart. If the people, you can't know, there's no possible way. And also it's a curriculum is basically at the same time redundant, because we need to stimulate people to be able to develop themselves and to explore and to come up with innovative solutions and be agile. So you have to let go of the curriculum and make people develop their own curriculum as they go, because that will give them the best education possible, but also develop the skills needed for the future.
I think a large part of this too is cultural. You know, I agree with the education systems. We have as I mentioned, this 2030 collapse that they're talking about economically. They're saying invest in infrastructure. Well, that's building, that's trades, that's plumbers, it's electricians, it's crane operators. And certainly here, at least in the United States, it's not sexy to be one of those people. It's much sexier to be tech, or much sexier to be a movie star or something like that. But that's the direction that we have to go in, is the education system that has people learning the basics and the fundamentals. We have the school systems that support writing codes. We've got those in spades, right? They're globally around the world. But it's the trades that we have, I think, at least in the United States and possibly even up in Canada, where we have a real shortfall, because it's just not sexy to be a plumber. But if you are a plumber today, you're making very good money. And we have a tremendous shortfall in any schools around here that support trade. So I absolutely agree with that. That then traces back to immigration, right? If you can't train them internally, how are you going to bring them into your country to do it?
Hmm. Okay, and then you're starting to open up questions about taxes and borders,
exactly,
and legitimate kind of ecosystems. So,
and tariffs too. Tariffs are another big one. Yep.
If the four of us decided to be our own country, where will we pay our taxes, right? So I don't know where Annie pays his as a remote worker. I don't know where Angelique pays hers. And I guess you pay yours in the USA, Jill, because once you're in that machine, you're never leaving, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
I currently pay mine in the UK, but I could equally be paying mine in Portugal.
Well, the tax situation is pretty clear, actually. Wherever in most of the world except the US and Eritrea, I believe, if you're living in that country for more than 6 months out of a year, you have to file taxes in that country. But there is an interesting question around remote work. There was a great article written by Laurel, I forget her last name, I could share it after, who she talked about, is it illegal to work remotely? Most people don't understand this, and that's a very interesting question which kind of demonstrates that governments don't have a clue about the future of work. Today, there's a lot of, probably 100,000 remote workers and more, and especially people who are traveling, digital nomads. And a lot of people, the way they're employed, don't understand the tax implications of that. Because when you're in a country for even 3 months and you're working without a work permit, that is illegal. But that's a really...
You're not working for a business in that country, right? You're working for a business in another country.
Yes, but that is true. But technically, if you're on a tourist visa, you're not supposed to be working. That is illegal.
If you have a business meeting, you cannot have anything. So if I meet an interesting person and the conversation moves to business-like things, I have to stop and say, no, I have to take a photo of this church now.
That's the idiocy of the situation, that the governments that we've got and the systems that we've got in place actually have no real correlation with how people are changing, how work is changing already in the present. They forget about the future, which is what leads me to believe that I don't think we have the mechanism to understand how fast we are changing, and to bring in the right kind of regulations. I mean, somebody talked about legislation and regulation. I don't think we can do that because we've already changed so much, and our laws are still antiquated, whether it comes to taxes or the movement of people. They're all very antiquated. They're all from 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I've sat in a number of breakfasts with politicians in the UK talking about things like visas, and I look at them, even the youngest ones, in their late 30s and early 40s in senior leadership positions, they're like 50 years behind in their thinking.
Sure.
They just don't understand that we can work like this, and this can be chargeable work, if you like. This kind of collaboration, building code libraries and stuff can be chargeable work that is independent of the borders that they put around it, independent of the tax systems that they put around it. I can be registered in Estonia and paying that money straight into the Estonian tax system at a flat 10%, while working with you in Boston, while working with you in Lisbon, while working with another friend in India. Yeah. But I'll be living in the UK.
What happens to tariff wars if a lot of work shifts into a service or consulting related role? Can you tax this? Can you tax consulting work? The tariff wars that we're talking about today, which is becoming kind of very common in the last few months, we've all heard about it. Can that actually continue in the future, in 11 years, where let's say 85% of the work is going to be done over the internet? How do you tax that?
I don't know. We've had the internet for 30 years and we still haven't figured out how to tax anything on it, right? So, and certainly these trade wars have been going on for centuries. The one thing about it is they're ever changing. I left Canada, where I worked for a while, and moved down to the United States, and NAFTA was a deal then, the trade wars between Canada, US, and Mexico, and they're still fighting them today. So I'm not sure however that goes away, but the interesting thing is that mankind always seems to find its way around it one way or the other. And that's an interesting way to look at what is the future of work. If we can't rely on the governments to make the changes, then who's going to make them? And I think it's going to be migration is huge, and it's going to be culturally. What is the nature of the country at the time that either has the demand or doesn't has the talent but not the demand, or the other way around? And every country is different that way.
And Mark Thompson in London, he has an interesting perspective on governments and government systems particularly. And what he was saying was, if you look at the UK and you look at all the regional councils, they all build their own data systems, they all build their own processing systems, they all collect their own regional taxes. And then at a national level, we do similar. So what we've really got is basically 300 lots of duplication that we pay for at least twice on a regional and then national basis in order to fulfill it. But realistically, they could all be doing the same thing on one platform in this cloud-based world that we have, on one platform with one set of systems, with one amount of administration. We'd save billions across the country, which could be used for more meaningful purposes, but we don't do it because we believe it creates jobs in all of those economies. And each of those regions and the national body can't speak to each other well enough to actually be on one platform. But we waste billions, not just £100 here or there, but billions on that kind of infrastructure. So, part of me wants to say the future of work and particularly taxes and stuff is more tribal, it's smaller. Another part of me wants to say, well, actually, maybe it is just one planet, maybe there's just one system, and universal basic income comes out of that one system, as well as taxes go into that one system from everybody globally. But we don't think like that, do we? We think about our little tribes in our little corners of the world.
You're from the UK.
Don't forget.
I'm not sure what that means.
Really? You're giving me that? You're giving me that?
And don't forget.
You live on your island,
Shame.
Move back in time, stop time.
I think there's a forced mute here, Angelique. I'm just going to press that button here.
By the way, there are questions in the QA. Stu, you wanna just go through those?
Yes. So at the top we've got Sylvia. She says, if corporates invest in profitable results, do you believe that we actually are learning and achieving the right knowledge for fulfillment? And the end, what matters nowadays, we, them, or both? Dave Underwood said, will skills just become uploadable? In other words, if you can afford the upgrade and have the dexterity, you can be anything, but only if you can afford it. I think Dave's been watching The Matrix a little bit this morning before he joined us. And Joanna, yes, governments can tax consulting work. So let's try Sylvia's for a start. If corporates invest in profitable results, do you believe that we actually are learning and achieving the right knowledge for self-fulfillment? It's a good question. If it's all about the destination, is it the right thing for self-fulfillment, or is it just about the job? Where do you stand on that, Angelique? If corporates lead the education?
I think that the corporates are slowly changing. I look mainly at what I know from Dutch corporates, but also around the globe. So you can see that even like a company like Ernst & Young Australia has been give their employees a 12-week life leave, so that people can explore whatever they want. They can travel, they can do a course, they can work on their own projects. They are creating this kind of space, obviously because they don't want to drain their talents, leaving them because they have personal need for development. I also see things like that is exactly in the more feminine-dominated industries in the Netherlands very popular, like healthcare, to have mindfulness incorporated in the daily practices at the job. So I see that, as Annie mentioned, the chief happiness officer, happiness at work, this personal well-being is way higher on the agenda in corporates than it was all 5 years ago. So I do think that also to have the awareness of being more agile and more innovative, autonomy will be higher, self-government of teams will be higher, and they will all lead to this, let me just see where Sylvia's question, to what Sylvia says, to fulfilling. And to be honest, like the people working in corporate, they're also part of society. So what they want to bring their children and what they want to bring out of life, they also ultimately bring back into the corporate structure. So there are changes, but the pressure, and Jill can probably relate to that with her other job, pressure from private equity and shareholders on profitable results is like the power goes against it. Yeah. But I also think that in time, probably in 2030, that will probably also be changed. I think that people are just not going to be accepting it anymore so much. That there are already companies that put in their KPIs like, a profit is just as important as our sustainable footprint. So there are companies making that corporate strategic decisions, and so they are resisting this pressure from shareholders and private equity on profit only.
So we've got 4 minutes left, and I'm going to challenge each of you for one thing, okay, to close us out. So my daughter is 7.5. In 11 years' time, at 2030, she'll be 18. As the godparents for today of my daughter, what advice do you want to give her about her future of work? I'll start with Annie, and then go to Jill, and then Angelique to close us out.
Ooh,
what do you want to tell Sophia, Annie? No pressure. I mean, she's only my entire world, so don't like this one.
Well, I think she probably has a great start, considering you are her dad, and I'm sure her mom is also awesome like you. So she probably has the right kind of parents to guide her into her work future of what she's going to be doing. But I think it's going to be probably less important for her to worry about getting like a college degree necessarily. I think it's all about her experiences and on what kind of skills does she have and what she really is good at. I think that's most important. Like you said, we are going to have these jobs that we don't even know exist. So it's going to be important for her to be exposed to as much of the real world as possible in terms of the kind of trends and maybe technology and the kind of jobs and new things that are happening in the world. And then she can, when she's 18 is the college time, right? You decide on going to college and what kind of things you're going to do. I don't think colleges per se will change in 10 years. They will start offering, all these fantastic degrees around skilling and happiness and fulfillment rather than the kind of traditional education structure we have. I don't think that's going to change. But it's going to be important. It's going to be, I think she'll have a better opportunity to understand what her options are if she wants to pursue her own dream, maybe have a startup or do her own thing, be an entrepreneur, versus if she wants to get into more traditional kind of roles of, let's say, going into law or medicine, which requires a college degree. I think she'll probably have a lot more options, considering that she is coming from a very privileged and a privileged background and from a society that has more options, as opposed to, let's say, if she was somewhere else. So I think she'll have a good future.
I like you taking your advice to her is basically to get good parents. I like it. Thank you.
Listen to your dad.
Yeah, right. That doesn't happen already. There's no worries. Okay, just
definitely, Stewart. I would say education. She's got to follow her passion, whatever it is. There's going to be by 2030 8 billion people on the planet, and she will find purchasers of whatever her passion service is. But she needs education, because I think we can all agree on the call that education is what opens up opportunities to us, whether we're going to live rurally or whether we're going to live globally. And let her follow her passion, but get a degree.
I felt sure you were going to say she should train to be a plumber. I felt sure that was going to happen.
I would say no, because I don't know anybody who wants that job, but no.
Okay.
She could be an artisanal plumber.
She could.
Plumber. That could be awesome.
She could design plumbing products.
Okay, and also serve coffee. I understand. Okay. So Angelique, where are you going to close us out with then? What's your advice for Sophia and her future?
Yeah, first of all, I love the question. Thank you. I can agree with Annie and Jill on both of their advices. I think that for her to understand is that she wouldn't be going to college and after that, stop learning. I think keep on learning. That should be the main thing that she will. For her, reality is for us as well. We always need to learn and to adapt. I think that she should be aware to have this mindset of creating the best life, and that would be connecting to her passion, but also to where she wants to change and where she sees changes. Because as Annie said, the privileged background and the societal problems that we might change might require people like her to take the lead in solutions, finding solutions that will help society forward.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to everybody who was part of the webinar and added the questions, particularly you, Dave. You've been right across the questions in the chat there. Thank you for that. Appreciate it, because I know you're at a conference today as well. So that draws us to an end. What I'll do is I'll try and put some of this into a Medium article, particularly the advice for Sophia. I think that makes a great kind of Medium article to close up the body of work. And thank you again for today. I appreciate it all very much, all your input. It's taken us to a really interesting place.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Good seeing everybody.
Stu, thanks everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.